And now, without further ado, I'll hand things over to Chris.
Thanks very much, Sarah, and thank you to everyone who's joining us today. As you can see, we have a fairly full agenda for the next 45 minutes to an hour, and I promise to leave time for questions throughout the presentation as well as at the end. Please keep in mind that this is meant as a high-level overview of our capabilities, and I'd be very happy to address and provide a more personalized demo for any specific questions or specific projects that you may be working on at your convenience. Let's go ahead and get started. CompetencyCore helps you to build a skilled, engaged, and productive workforce through best practice selection, learning and development, performance management, and succession management. The entire suite of web-based management tools is built around the competencies, so the extensive library of predefined and proven competencies are embedded right into all of your HR functions. At HRSG, we define competencies as the essential knowledge, skills, and abilities required to perform successfully in a given job and benchmark excellence. And by setting those benchmarks, competencies therefore form the foundation for your HR and your talent management practices. There are a lot of figures that get tossed around to quantify the return of investment of competency-based talent management. Some experts say you can expect a 26% higher revenue per employee, and others quote a 19% increase in employee performance. Regardless of which specific number it is, it has been proven time and again that adopting a talent management approach like competency-based talent management will translate into business improvements. There's one more concept that I want to go over before we actually jump into the tool, and that's the concept of a competency architecture. What really differentiates our management tools from other talent management software systems is that this tool puts the competencies at the foundation, which makes sure that the competencies are built right into all of your HR processes. There isn't any other system out there that automates HR and talent management like we do. Anyone who's downloaded our best practice guide for implementing competencies will probably recognize this image. We use this diagram of a house to illustrate the concept of a competency architecture. The foundation of your architecture is your company's vision and values. These form the bedrock of everything that comes after. And when built this way, you can really ensure your corporate vision and goals are translated into employee behaviors through the core competencies. This example architecture also includes job family competencies, which we tend to refer to as general competencies, as well as job-specific competencies or technical competencies. So now that we've talked a bit about the concept of CompetencyCore and competency-based management, let's take a look at the tool itself. But before I do that, I'm just going to pause, Sarah, and see if there have been any questions based off the introduction so far.
Thanks, Chris. I've received one question so far, and that is whether all competency architectures need to look like this.
Do all good question. No. Your architecture could be structured like this, or whatever makes more sense for your organization or for the project that you're working on. Actually, the first thing that we do when we start to work down the competency management path with you is help you to define this architecture if you don't already have one. And then we will configure the setup of the tool to match this framework. Actually, you see when we get into the tool that the architecture in the software in my pretend company has another layer of something called responsibilities and attributes. So we'll see that in just a few seconds. So were there any other questions?
No, Chris, that's it for now.
Okay, perfect. Please feel free to ask as many questions as you wish. Sarah is monitoring the chat panel, so any questions come up, please feel free to pose those to Sarah. Let's then take a look at the CompetencyCore tool itself. The software, the management tool, has been developed from research and client engagements conducted over the past 23 years of HRSG's existence. And through our work with our clients, it became clear that in order to implement competencies in a way that provides long-term benefits that is easily manageable, automated tools were needed. And this began the CompetencyCore software. And as I mentioned earlier, the foundation of the tool are the competencies, and the competencies are woven throughout all of the application within the tool and provide an integrated competency-based management system. So using CompetencyCore and the comprehensive libraries, you could standardize your hiring process. You can effectively match changing job requirements and identify and develop your top performers and leaders. You could also strategically plan and manage your human capital. And we're touching all of these functionalities of the software in today's session. But I would first want to look at the core of the software, and that's the competency libraries. So I'm in the organization module, and this is the main module where you would build your competency architecture and store your competencies, your job profiles, and any user information. There are three main pieces that I'm going to touch on today, and that's the competency libraries, the organizational charting capabilities, as well as the competency job profiles. Let's start in the competency libraries. You see here, this is the architecture that I built for my pretend company in this organization, where I have responsibilities and attributes, I have core competencies, general competencies, and then I have those technical competencies. Let's take a quick look at those technical competencies. And again, these are competencies that you would expect to see that are learned through experience in a particular sector or industry, through specific training or education. So CompetencyCore has approximately 400 to 500 technical competencies, and we've grouped them into sectors. So there's finance and accounting. Within finance and accounting, you can see we have many different subsections as well. Engineering competencies, health, safety, and environment, HR, IT, legal, etc. So there's quite literally hundreds of sector-specific technical competencies. Now I'm going to go back into our libraries. I'm going to look at the general competencies, and I'm going to select a general competency as an example to look at in deeper. General competencies are those competencies that you typically would see flow throughout many different job profiles. So they're not specific to sector. And we've grouped these in different categories of communication: business skills, personal skills, and thinking skills. That we've identified, when I say we, I mean our industrial organizational psychologists who've done this research, have identified approximately 65 competencies that are general in nature. You could also think of these as your leadership or your soft skill type competencies. And these are competencies that, again, whether you are an accountant, whether you are an HR practitioner or a, maintenance person, client focus could be a competency that would apply to your job. So I've opened up client focus as an example because it's fairly well known by most people, and I'm sure everybody on the audience today has identified client focus as a competency need. This is how the competencies have been structured. All of the competencies will have a brief definition of what it means to be performing at that competency, or what the competency is. All the competencies have been scaled into proficiency levels. starting from level 1, which would indicate your least level of sophistication, or your basic understanding of the competency, right up to level 5, which identifies the most sophisticated knowledge or understanding of the competencies. And this is best practice, as it's important, as that's how you define the progression of a competency from your entry level to your strategic thinkers of the organization. Each level has a notion or a theme of what it means to be performing at that level. And then underneath each level, there are specific behavioral indicators that are measurable and indicate benchmark success or benchmark successful performance in each of these levels. So if we take the example of an HR department, the level 1 behaviors you'd expect to see from your more entry-level positions, such as an HR manager or HR administrator, whereas your level 5 behaviors you would expect to see from individuals who communicate strategically to achieve specific examples or set the direction for client focus within the organization or within a division. So you're looking at your VP of HR. So using a combination of technical and general competencies, you will then be able to make decisions based upon best practice to determine the essential competencies and specific levels for each job within your organization. And this is what we call a competency job profile. So using CompetencyCore, you can create your own job profiles, or you could use some of the competency profiles that have been developed by our consultants already. Before moving into those competency profiles, Sarah, I'm going to pause to see if there have been any questions about the competencies.
Thanks, Chris. Once again, I've just got one question for you, and it's whether or not the content and the competencies can be customized. Oh, yeah, absolutely. And you might have saw when I was hovering over these items that if I double-click, I'm logged in today as an administrator, so I have rights to edit and customize. So I could add into here easily enough, any changes that I want, but not only in the content, but right down to the profiles. When we look at the strings are customizable. If you don't like the word libraries, you want to call it, I don't know, dictionary or something completely different. The whole software was created so that it's configurable, so that you can make these changes yourself, or you can engage our professional services to help you make tweaks and changes to the competencies and profiles. But you see, I'll make mention to it as we go through the demonstration. The flexibility of the software. Thank you for that question. That's it, Sarah? Thank you, Chris. Yeah, that's it for now.
Okay. Okay. Let's take a look at a competency job profile, and let's go at that through the organization charting capabilities. So once you've identified your architecture and you picked your competencies, the next step would be to build your organizational chart. The reason why this is important, as you can use the tool to help identify your reporting structures and your career paths and so on. So I'm going to go through the life of a HR position. So within this job stream, if I continue to go through here, I'm logged in today as John Smith. John Smith's the human resource manager within this organization. You could see who reports to John Smith, which positions they fill. You could also see who are John's peers, obviously who John reports to, etc., through this organizational chart. From here, I can also view the job profile of this particular position. So again, John Smith is the HR manager, And here is an example of what a competency job profile would look like. Again, a brief description of the job. These are the architecture pieces that we saw earlier in the presentation. If I expand these, then we'll get the details of what are the responsibilities and attributes of a successful HR manager. Again, completely configurable. You could change these, you could edit, customize it as you see fit. Then we get into the core competencies. Again, these are the core competencies that I've selected that would align with my company's corporate mission, vision, and values, achievement orientation, business perspective, and work ethics. You see that each of the competencies would have a specific level that's required from the position or an individual performing in that position for successful performance. Each of these bulleted statements would be the behaviors that are required for level 3 of the competency, in this case business perspective. Again, you can see this is hot links, so if I click on this, it's going to give me the competency of business perspective in full detail. Moving down, after the core competencies, we have those general competencies or job family competencies. These would be, again, competencies that are required for successful job performance. Client focus was our example today, so we see that this particular job requires level 4 of client focus, and again, these are the behaviors required of level 4 client focus. Moving down, then we could see the technical competencies that would be required of this job, and these technical competencies are HR in nature. As an HR manager, you expect to see some technical requirements within that HR job stream: change management, compensation, employee relations, etc. And you're seeing, as an HR manager, you're seeing levels 3s and 4s, which would be fairly standard of a middle manager. You're also seeing that there's not a huge level of specialization within this. There's a broad level of understanding of HR. Again, if we took an example of a recruiting specialist, well, you know what? They're going to have recruitment and selection as a competency. They might have level 5, whereas the other, other competencies may not be required of that job, or maybe of lower value in level. Sir, are there any questions about the profiles?
No questions have come in, Chris.
Okay, perfect. So as I was mentioning earlier, our consultants have developed profiles like this one. There are approximately 700 job profiles that our consultants have developed over the years, based upon competencies that we have in our dictionary and based upon our consulting engagements with our clients. Let's move on. Let's take a look at some of that functionality that I was looking at earlier. What many of our clients struggle with is how to assess the competencies of their employees or potential recruits. So I'm going to start by looking at one of these features that will help you with that, and that's our interview builder module. So our consultants have developed over 1,000 unique behavioral-based interview questions that have been mapped not only to the competency, but to the specific behaviors required at each level of the competency. So based off of the job profile for which you want to hire, the tool will enable you to select the most appropriate questions to allow you to make informed hiring decisions. So if we're looking now at the screen, you'll see that there's a number of competencies. Those are written in blue, and beside it there is a number. The number would represent how many questions have been created and mapped to this particular competency. I'm going to go down to our client focus example. So you can see that there are 13 questions that have been written to determine how successful a candidate or an individual would be at performing these levels. So these are all behavioral based questions. This particular question is written for level 1. All of the questions would have anywhere between 3 and 5 or 6 probe questions, which would help you solicit a deeper response should you wish. So using this bank of behavioral based interview questions, I can then go and create specific interview guides based off of the jobs that I need to hire towards. So I've gone into an HR manager guide that I've started to create in the past. There's some information that you can include in this, so you could have a short description of the interview guide should you wish. You could have things like interview or introductions and conclusions and different things. You could create a scale for the interview guide. I'm kind of going through this quickly. I want to get down to the interview questions to show you how they get added. You can see I've already selected a few interview questions for this guide. I've also created interview questions that aren't directly related to a competency. So you could have things like your icebreaker questions, or you can really standardize those upfront questions that are asked to get an understanding and a feel for the candidate that aren't competency related. You also see that there's a number of questions that relate to specific competencies. I'm moving these around. You could order them in any way you want. Now, if I'm looking at this and I decide that I want to add additional questions for this particular interview guide, the software will automatically pick up on what are the competencies required for this job, and they will also pick up on what level is also required and give you an easy access to those competency questions. So if I wanted to then go in and add a question for recruitment and selection, if we remember, recruitment and selection for the HR manager was level 4, I could easily go in here and add this to my interview guide should I wish. And then I can move it around. I could put it wherever I want. I could print this in Word, or I could print this in PDF. I could bring it with me to my interview. I could also, as the administrator, as the HR manager, I could publish these reports so that my line managers or my hiring managers can go and pick these up. They're all in one location. Again, standardizing the process, reducing the time spent on interviewing. One of our clients is a major claims management firm that's based throughout North America, and they've been successfully using CompetencyCore for many years now. And they came to us with the primary need of a way to reduce turnover in a specific position. So they were experiencing a turnover rate of over 50% within one particular job within the organization that was quite important. So they're a 10,000 person company, and they were hiring approximately 5,000 people are going through having a turnover of 50% of those hires that they would do. So they're hiring approximately 2,500 people every year in this particular job. So what we did is we analyzed the job requirements. We built a competency job profile for this job, and we introduced a standardized hiring process based upon behavioral-based interview guides within their 150 independently run offices. By implementing this process, they reduced their turnover rate by over 50%, and not only that, but probably most importantly, is they reduced their time their managers spent on hiring by over 40%, which allowed them to focus on more revenue generating activities, of course saving the organization millions of dollars in revenue since implementation 6 or 7 years ago. They also refer to this process as shark repellent because it keeps the lawyers away is what is what he said to me the one time in our conversation. So again, a standardized process that dictates you know, the hiring process within an organization is always a good idea. So I'm going to pause there. I'm going to see if there have been any questions that have been asked about the interview guides.
Thanks, Chris. We don't actually have anything. We had a question that came in, but you've addressed it already, so we're all good on that front.
Okay, wonderful. So maybe what I'll do is I'll let you interrupt me or stop me if there's any questions. I'm seeing we're almost at 1:30, and I'll just keep moving through this process or through the demo, and if there's any questions that come up, feel free to jump in.
That sounds good, and I think I actually might have a question for you.
Okay.
I may need a little bit more clarification from the participant who just asked this, but the question is, how do you put questions for certain levels? So I'm assuming the question is about designating particular questions at particular levels of competency.
Yeah, that's a good question. So there's a technical way to do it. Obviously, the software is customizable, so you can add questions. When you're adding the question, you can say which level it goes to within the software. And that's just part of the flow, part of the process. How our consultants have mapped the questions to the levels would be based upon their analysis of the behaviors required at that level of that job. If that's the question that was being asked as well, like how did our consultants map the questions, or how can you do it within the tool?
Yeah, so the question is around how do you know what factors determine the level of the question?
And that's a great question. I probably can't answer that myself, as I'm not a consultant, but I'd be very happy to, you know, if you take a note of that individual, I could follow up with them and perhaps schedule a discussion with one of our consultants as well.
That's perfect. We'll do that, Chris. Thank you.
Okay. Let's move on. Let's take a look at other ways of assessing individuals. Let's look at the assessment capabilities that are related directly to interviewing. CompetencyCore has assessment functionality that can be used in such means as self-assessments and supervisor assessments or 180 assessments, 360 assessments, as well as blind or supervisor-only assessments. And these can be used in a number of different functionalities. Could be used in pre-screening assessments for interviews, performance evaluations, succession planning, career development. There's a number of different reasons why you could use an assessment and a number of different ways that you can use an assessment. What I'll do for today's purposes, I will perform a self-assessment to give you an idea of how the software works and how it looks. And I'm going to perform that self-assessment on the HR manager. Now, this HR manager, you see there's several different assessments that I've created within my site. Typically, an assessment would have the number of questions would relate directly to the number of behavioral indicators of the profile. So if I was looking at the human resource manager and I counted up all of the behavior indicators, I would see that there's 67 behavioral indicators. And this is a leading or best practice, so that when you're doing a competency-based assessment, you're assessing on all the behaviors required of that job. Now I've gone in and I've created a slightly slimmer version of that. I've created a competency assessment with only 9 questions, just for the use of time. And I'm going to use that assessment for today's example as we walk through it. So the software obviously is flexible enough. You could add questions, you could take away questions should you wish. Some templated information. Again, this can be completely configured, changed, customized to read your whatever you'd like for your introduction. For this assessment, we're going to use an effectiveness rating scale. And this rating scale is based off of a Likert scale of 1 to 5. Again, this is a common practice. The software will allow you to put in any scale that you want. You could have, meets, does not meet, 1, 2, 3, yes, no, true, false, whatever works for your assessment. In this example, I will be evaluating how well I perform the behaviors that are required for my job, from limited effective to extremely effective. I, or the administrator, the person who created the assessment, also sets a target rating for that assessment or for that profile. And in this particular example, I've set the profile or the target to be fully effective. So this is used to form the gap analysis report that we get from this assessment. So here's the beginning of the assessment. You can see that the first question relates to interactive communication. This is the definition of interactive communication, and here is one of the behaviors required of the HR manager for interactive communication. I would be able to select where I felt I was based off of the definitions of the effectiveness rating scale. So maybe I feel that I'm somewhat effective. This particular question has a comment box, so I could put my notes in here. I could put my justifications of why I believe I'm extremely effective or limited effective or whatever the case may be. You can see that this is an optional comment, so I could leave it blank if I wished. Next question, again, same idea, work ethics and values. Here's the behavior that's required of me. You're seeing now that this is a mandatory comment box. So again, in order for me to move on to the next screen, I would have to fill in a comment here. I've selected this as a mandatory comment because it's one of my core competencies. So you can see by the rest of the examples, you don't need to have any comments if you choose either. So I'm going through this assessment quite quickly. You would expect that your employees would spend a little bit more time, especially if you're asking them to put comments in and to justify their answers. And what I'm going to do, I'll leave one of these blank. I'm going to hit finish. This page allows me to reflect and review on the assessment, so I could go back to these questions, I could read my notes, I could see how I rated myself or possibly my colleague or my subordinates. I could also see that one of these I didn't do one of these questions, so I could go back to this question and I could fill in my response that I missed. So I had finished. I'm going to submit this. I'm going to say I'm happy with this. By submitting this, one of 3 options is going to happen. I'll be given the option to review the report, which we're due now. I'm also given the option to create a learning guide or learning plan as well as a performance plan. So the software will pick up on the gaps from this assessment report and pull them directly onto the learning plan and performance plan. And we'll take a look at that after we've reviewed the gap report here. So there's a number of different components of the gap report. I'm just going to go through and highlight a few of the main ones here. We could take a look at the rating scale. Again, however it was decided, whatever scale you're using would appear here. I'm going to look at the competencies set up by groups. So these again go back to the architecture of the libraries. So this would give me an average score of how I fit within these groupings of competencies. So it gives me a very high-level overview of where I fit within this job. Again, keep in mind this is only 9 questions. You'd get a lot more detailed response based off of the assessment of 67 questions. But again, I can see from here that I do quite well at the core competencies and those thinking skills. Not too terrible at those HR competencies, but there's probably some room for me to develop in those communication, interpersonal skills. So I could, I could look at each competency as an overview individually versus the target. This is where I fit. This is what was average to get those group summaries. I could look at the strengths to build upon. So these are the competencies that were at target or above, and here are those gaps. Here are those competencies that I'm not quite at target for the job that either I'm performing at now or want to be performing at for career development or succession planning. So these would be the items that I need to develop further in a learning plan. Or it could be the items that get pulled onto a performance plan. I could also look at the competencies in more detail. So I've clicked on interactive communication. Here's the one behavior that I chose for this assessment, and this is how I rated myself based off of this assessment. I'm going to flip into another assessment that's completed. This is actually a 360 assessment, just to give you an idea of how how it would look if there's multiple inputs, as well as all of the questions. So in this case, we're looking at business perspective. Here are those behavioral indicators for business perspective at the level that's required for my job. You can see here that there's multiple inputs from different people. You can see that there's obviously some varying degrees of acceptance or reporting. These would be very useful information for performance evaluations, for succession planning, etc. You could have some real-life conversations with your employees about where you see yourself versus the supervisor or your peers in this case of a 360. If there are any comments from any of the different groups, they would be underneath each of the behavioral indicators. Sarah, you haven't paused or interrupted me for questions, so I'm just going to assume that there aren't any, that we have a very intelligent group here, and they understood my messaging for the assessments, and I'm going to move on to the learning guides unless you jump in. Let's take a look at the learning plans. So I'm asking the software to create a learning plan based off that assessment report. So this is one way to create a learning plan. You could also create a learning plan from scratch. You could create one that's not based off of the report. Often used for onboarding activities or just general learning plans for their employees' own use. There's some background information that I set up based off of template that I've created for my learning plans. Again, you would create your own templates, or we could help you create those templates for setting up. These competencies have all been pulled from my gap report. There's a handful in here. I might decide, well, you know what, I'm only going to look at a few of these, or I may also decide I'm going to add some more into here as well. I could add these to specific goal groups, so personal learning, objective competencies, or I can leave it as I wish. I'm going to create this. This is going to create a plan, and I'll walk through the different components of the plan. The learning plan and the development plans and succession plans are set up in a similar format, in that there's different information and different components of the plans that are similar, but could also be changed depending on your needs. So the plans will typically have a cycle. I've created a fairly simple cycle here for my learning plans. There's only 3 different milestones: approval, mid-year review, and a year-end review. This is fairly basic. You could get quite more sophisticated if you want. You could have multiple milestones with different people giving inputs at different times. Again, the software will grow in complexity as you want it to. Each of these learning plans have been assigned a date for completion, and the software will send automatic responses or automatic prompts or nag emails if you've gone past the date that was set for your milestone. can see the participants of the plan. I'm logged in, as I mentioned, as John Smith, and in my pretend world, I'm the human resource manager as well as the CEO. I like to retain control, but I could go in here and I could remove, or I could add additional people to this plan. So I'm going to remove myself as the CEO, and I'm just going to keep myself as the human resource manager in this particular plan. But I could go into here, I could look at who are my peers, and again, this is going back to that org chart. So I could decide, you know what, I want Bill Wayne on my plan, and I also want to add a few of my subordinates in here. I'm going to add Jake and Ned into my performance plan. I'll save this. Now obviously we have additional people that can provide input into my learning plan. Again, this is optional. You know, oftentimes learning plans are just for the individual, or possibly the individual and their supervisor. But again, you know, I could choose to have multiple inputs on my learning goals should I wish. And this is what we call generic fields. You know, you can put in whatever information that's, you know, required or needed within the plans. Again, very highly customizable. Many different options to add comments to the plan. So these would be added to the plans. There'd be time-stamped within the time-stamped with the individual's name and date. What happens with the learning plans is the competencies then are attached to learning resources, and these learning resources are mapped to the competencies so that I could then easily and effectively go in and create a learning guide with learning resources that are attached to those competencies that indicate you know, the learning requirements for that competency. So we have approximately 1,400 learning resources that have been mapped to the competencies in the software, but you could also map your own competency or your own learning resources, or integrate directly with an LMS to provide these learning resources. The software will track the learning resources as well as the plan and provide feedback and comments as you move through. I'm going to go into the performance piece just to show you a little bit about how that would look. It's going to look very similar to the learning plan in terms of the look and feel. This performance plan is completed, so I'll show you some additional aspects that could be added to plans. This performance plan, I've set up 4 different milestones, but again, it looks similar to what we saw. The one major difference typically between a performance plan and a learning plan is, you know, ratings. So we're going to be rating the performance of the individual. So I've added in here a performance plan scale. So I'll be rating, or my performance would be rated from, you know, below standards to superior, and these are typically rated against a KPI. Again, comments here. Here are those objectives. You know, I can go into these objectives and I can then get some further information. So one of my objectives for this year is to improve my hiring practices, or improve the recruitment processes. Here's the key performance indicators of successful performance that myself and my supervisor may have, you know, written down. Here are the results, the outcomes that I have, you know, completed so far. I could continue to add the results and outcomes. I can add comments and plans. I can forward this to my manager. My manager would then be able to go in and assess how complete I have, or how well I've done at that particular objective. The objectives would be given a rating scale or measurement. It could be weighted, so each objective could be worth a different amount of the overall total of my plan, or it could be standardized weighting where every objective has has equal value for my performance plan. So I'm going to keep motoring through. We're at quarter two now. If there's not any questions, I'm going to move right into the inventory. However, please feel free to jump in if you wish.
Feel free to move right along, Chris.
Okay, thank you. So the last piece that I want to show you here is part of our succession planning and career development. This is a concept we call inventory. And what an inventory is a collection of competencies that have been validated by my supervisor or manager. So this is a personal inventory list of all the competencies at a specific level that has been validated. My manager would have said, yes, Chris, you have analytical thinking of level 4, and this was validated on this date. The validations can come through assessments. It could come through observations, could come through performance. It could come through me requesting a validation and providing justification that I have specific competencies. But what this allows me to do, or my manager or an HR practitioner, is to get a really great understanding of the skills or the competencies and skills and knowledges within the organization against jobs, upcoming jobs, possible future jobs for the organization if you're doing change management, and let you have an understanding of who in the organization has specific skills to fill these roles. So if I was an HR manager and I knew I had to do some succession planning, I needed to hire a human resource director. I can go into here, I can search and say I want to hire a human resource director. Who in the organization would be the best fit for the human resource director? It's going to give me a name of the individuals who have a match to this. Now, in my demo site, I only have a handful of individuals in my organization, but I can see John Smith has the best fit at this moment. He has 66.67, so I can go into here, I can view the report. This is going to give me a report that shows me what are my matches and what are those gaps as well. So you can see the ones in green are my matches. Either I'm at or above level for this job, and then here are those competencies that I need to develop if John Smith was going to fill this role. So this could possibly be completed in the forms of learning management or a learning and development plan. These might be competencies that John has or can display but haven't been validated yet. Or you might look at these and say, you know what, John's way off for this job. John's not going to be able to meet the requirements required in the timeline that we have. We may have to go external to hire in this position. Now, likewise, individuals can do their own career development based off of a similar search, where I could say, okay, based on my inventory, what jobs out there would I be a good fit for? And I could go in, I could view, I could view the gap reports and see where my matches and fits would be. And even from that report, I could also create a succession plan or learning plan to develop that profile or those competencies in more detail. Sarah, I'm going to pause there because I promised to leave some time at the end for questions. Feel free to pose questions. I want to thank everybody for asking those questions that you did ask and for joining us today. I'd be very happy to speak with you individually should you have any questions or would like to speak with our consultants about some of the methodology behind the development of CompetencyCore.
Perfect. Thanks, Chris. Thanks to you as well for delivering once again another great session. I hope everybody found it useful and was able to get some good information from it. Everyone will be receiving an email shortly after this session with a link to an article that should provide a little bit more information. I will set up calls for the individuals who were asking for that, and we'll take that offline and answer the rest of those questions. So thanks again to you, Chris, and thank you very much to everybody who participated. Have a great evening or afternoon, depending on where you're located.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, everyone.
The